welcome everybody today. Thank you for attending our first speaker for the Rural Computing Speaker Series for the year. We'll be hearing from Dr. Marcus Foth. This is co-hosted by the Rural Computing Research Consortium and the Quello Center for Media and Information. My name is Gene Hardy. I am the director of the Rural Computing Research Consortium. Just a quick intro of what the consortium is, in case you haven't attended one of our talks before. The consortium seeks to unite students and faculty across Michigan State University to advance research and outreach in areas related to rural computing. From a multidisciplinary perspective, we've got members all across campus, from the College of Communication Arts and Sciences to the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, the College of Engineering, the College of Human Medicine, etc. A real quick plug for our next talk. Before I talk about today's talk, we are going to be bringing on Maz Gardezi from Virginia Tech for an in-person hybrid talk in January. Mark your calendars, January 26th. Called Responsible Innovation for Climate Smart Agriculture, Lessons from U.S. and Remote Mountain Communities of Pakistan. So with that, I will go ahead and introduce our speaker real quick. So Dr. Marcus Foth is a professor of urban informatics in the School of Design at Queensland University of Technology. And a chief investigator of QUT's Digital Media Research Center. He is a founding member of the More Than Human Futures Research Group. He has an extensive publication record, one of the longest I've seen in a while, with more than 260 peer-reviewed publications, and has many accolades, including being inducted as a fellow in 2017 by the Australian Computer Society, being inducted as a fellow to the Queensland Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2023, as a distinguished member of the Association for Computing Machinery in 2021, and is currently, I believe, still serving as on the College of Experts of the Australian Research Council. So with that very brief introduction, I will go ahead and, Marcus, if you want to go ahead and take over screen sharing, you should be able to, and we can get this party started.
Thank you very much, Gene. If you stop your screen, I can take over. There we go. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Really pleased to be here virtually. Would have loved to visit Michigan State again in person. We were just talking about the last time. I think it's far too long. I'm also talking to you from the future, the very near future, not as distant, but it's about 6 in the morning here in Brisbane, Australia, Meanjin, as the Indigenous peoples of this region call it. Now, the talk here is largely about urban, metropolitan urban kinds of research, but what I'm trying to do, and this is what we discussed with Gene in the lead up to this talk, is for me and try and make a couple of associations and implications that will hopefully also pertain to regional, remote, and rural areas. And perhaps in the discussion, we'll also find further opportunities to extend some of these notions and concepts that I'm introducing into contexts that are outside the inner city. So DataCare for digital twins, participatory data analytics, and the social license to operate smart cities. The way I've structured this talk is to give you a bit of context of how our research group and our research trajectories have evolved, and then I will talk a little bit about the smart city and what we feel has given rise for us to then have a focus on social license issues in that regard, in the deployment of smart city technology. So the Urban Informatics Research Lab at QUT started in 2006. We've been trying to maintain quite a interdisciplinary research approach. We are bringing together people, place, and technology. It's usually how I like to sum it up with this Venn diagram, where you can see the social sciences in touch with the spatial sciences, if you'd like, and with the computer sciences. So my own background is originally in computer science, but I've done a PhD in what you would probably call urbanism these days. It introduced interests and methods from human-computer interaction into the built environment quite early on. So I was interested in community networks and master plan communities and residential neighborhoods. And so this is then introducing the people and the place paradigm. And we've continued in that kind of regard, combining the theories and the methods from these various disciplines around the notion of urban informatics. As a disclaimer, though, the way that urban informatics has evolved, and this is a timeline that my colleague Anthony Townsend has created as part of the Cities of Data initiative, and you can see this timeline only goes to 2015, it actually is moved much more in this direction of urban science. So the way that we've been thinking about urban informatics is much broader and much more interdisciplinary, introducing humanities, social science, arts and design interests and concepts, whereas a lot of the research centers that are now called or use the terminology urban informatics, they are actually much more about data analytics per se, with that as a very strict, very positivist quantitative focus. So as a result, fast forward to today, the main programs that I'm interested in and leading have diversified. I still kind of refer to myself as a professor of urban informatics, but actually the portfolio of projects that I lead are much broader. And you can see the cows there in one of the pictures. So one of the areas that Jean already mentioned is the more than human futures. That area is actually growing and expanding in terms of the academic interest, not just in our group, but globally. There's a bit of a more than human turn in interaction design and the design scholarly field more broadly. That pertains to a rethinking of human-centered methods more towards life-centered methods, trying to consider ecological considerations, trying to move away from human exceptionalism for the way that user experience and human-centered design is often co-opted by industry for the very simple purposes of selling shit. And so in that research group, we've been adopting theories from the environmental humanities to try and rethink the way design goes about its practice and its research. And that is quite a interesting and evolving field. Today, I'll be talking about DataCare in smart cities. So that's the second bigger focus. We've also have funding from the Australian federal government for a multi-year project on digital inclusion. This is taking us across the country, also into more rural communities, and I might mention some of those throughout the talk. And this is a project that is wrapping up right now as the funding has come to an end. And then for a couple of years, and this is also in a bit of a transition phase right now, I've been focusing on blockchain implementations, not so much from a technical point of view, more from a supply chain, agricultural and food consumption, food production point of view. And again, that research was very interesting because it not only gave us opportunities to conduct field work in metropolitan areas of China, such as in Shanghai, but it also took us to the most rural and remote places of Australia where food is being produced. And so all of the research projects I mentioned, as well as those of my colleagues, are part of a larger research entity that's now called the QUT Design Lab. So the Urban Informatics Lab that I mentioned earlier has actually been merged and is part of the QUT Design Lab. So what are smart cities? I'm very cynical about this term these days, having worked in this space for so long. I always like to refer to it as much more of an industry notion than an academic notion. It's really an invention post-global financial crisis by a lot of the accounting firms and tech companies that needed to find ways to grow their business and to grow their portfolio of clients and products and services. And I think in a nutshell, and again, I'm quite cynical about it, I think that a lot of the existing technology and the existing services that already existed in the 80s and 90s were actually reframed, remarketed and repackaged in order to be applicable to cities. So what we are trying to do here is to actually look at the smart city notion in a much more critical manner, to not just be technology centric with regards to the opportunities that exist, but also look at some of the challenges, some of the risks, some of the dangers when it comes to the introduction of technology in cities. And you can see the different icons here. In order to try and summarize this in a very crude manner, I've been just looking at a couple of aspects here in this first part. But before I'll try and get this video. I hope this plays over Zoom. Oh, this has just stopped my... Can you still see this the screen?
Yes, we can.
For some reason, it's not letting me play this. Now, this is a video, and I'm happy to share the slides. You can go to this YouTube page to watch it. This is a video that is done by colleagues at the Sensible City Lab at MIT. And I've been working and talking with my colleague Carlo Ratti, who's been leading that research center for a long time, for a while. And this is a project that is looking at what they call the Global Mobility Index. What's interesting about this is the way that mobility across cities unfolds in a very, very similar pattern, no matter where across the globe you are. So this is a spinning globe that goes across the different time zones, and pretty much as people wake up, there is some sort of form of rush hour and congestion, and that is across time zones, across different cultural differences, across climatic regions, across geographic differences and distances as well. Now, what I think is an interesting takeaway here is the very much common characteristic and quality in smart city research to look from above. So you can see this is a very zoomed out view, obviously, because we look here at cities in comparison and look at the entire planet. But even when we talk individual cities, a lot of the smart city research is interested in data and analysis that is from above, looking at the way we can use data science and urban science in order to make produce insights that are often quite crude with regards to the nuances that are actually also existing in cities. Oh, here we go. This is now playing, is it? There we go. Soundtrack is very soothing and mesmerizing, probably not actually the experience you have when you're stuck there in a rush hour traffic jam in the morning trying to get to work. The other really important part that we are very interested in and very much working on that is also illustrated in this short little video is the notion of sustainability. So the fact that we are experiencing a global phenomenon of rush hour and traffic congestion that in some regions is actually not just occurring in the morning, but also not just in the afternoon, but 24/7. There are some cities that are talking about 24/7 rush hour where the traffic pretty much doesn't stop at all, is not just causing concern, but is already having real impacts on emissions, on climate change, and on the way that the consumerism notions are actually fueled by the smart city in the way that the actual real actions are not coming to the fore. And I'll explain what I'm talking about in a second. So there's various dimensions to smart cities and the way that it's been talked about by industry and governments. A lot of it obviously goes back to the built environment itself. It has a focus on the urban design, the way that we think of not just the relationships between urban, suburban, peri-urban areas, but also on societal issues such as housing and housing affordability. Because of the coming together of Internet of Things devices, the data that can be captured and stored and analyzed, there is a very heavy emphasis on what can be done with that invisible layer of the digital city or the data analytics that it produces. And often it then is talked about in ways that is correlated to these kinds of appearances of control centers. This is a very early one. IBM installed this in Rio de Janeiro, I think around 2012, which then has very profound implications for notions of urban governance, and I'll be talking about some of those. What we are very concerned about overall is the notion of technological solutionism, that oftentimes cities get bedazzled by industry presentations where all the kinds of problems that cities experience, whether it's, as I said, housing inaffordability, congestion, pollution, crime, waste management, the industry has found ways to produce services and products that can fix all of this. And so oftentimes researchers look at this, and this is not just limited to our group, but there's very profound bodies of literature in the areas of human geography and cultural studies and the humanities overall that are arguing that these technical fixes are just very much too short-sighted and too quick. They're quick fixes that enable industry to sell their products and services, but they may not actually produce the longer-term change and the systemic reform work that is needed in order to actually have a genuine understanding and impact that would be called sustainable. The more recent arrival on the scene, and again, in terms of the terminology, not so much in terms of what's under the bonnet, is the notion of the digital twin. The digital twin, as the name suggests, is supposed to be a mirror that is virtually embedded in a computer system arrived through modeling. There is digital twins that are optimized for the here and now, for the present time. So it's actually then used as a tool to enable and assist in the governance of cities here and now. But there's also digital twins that are then used to create speculative what-if scenarios. So they are much more for future projections, for urban planning, for the way that you can change certain trajectories, certain variables in the modeling in order to try and make assumptions and infer what would be, for instance, good decisions with regards to the placement of infrastructure, with regards to perhaps policy changes, with regards to the rollout of other types of technology. So Bloomberg here in this article talks about how digital twins enable us to go just from virtual cities to an entire notion of platform urbanism, and how cities are using these digital twins like a sim city for policymakers. The new technology which creates virtual models of cities and stimulates policy scenarios could be a potential game changer for urban planning. Some of my colleagues that are in urban planning sometimes laugh about these things, and I think they also have a right to laugh about these things, because a lot of the theories that are embedded in digital twin analysis haven't actually changed over a long time. The other reason why urban planning colleagues laugh about some of these hype statements is because of the notion that digital twins don't actually make any decisions. Michael Batt here in this article in Environment and Planning says it is more likely that digital twins are not identical twins, and the notion of an exact mirror is an idealization that will never be achieved. So what is actually embedded in his statement here is the conflict between the positivist absolute truth, the view from nowhere, objective view of cities, versus the messiness, the constructivist, the more qualitative view of cities that is inherent in also the location of urban disciplines such as geography, urban planning, architecture, and design, much more in the HAS field of humanities, arts, and social sciences than in the STEM field of positivist approaches to science. Digital twins are here referred to in this article in Forbes magazine, the solution to better decision-making. And one of the questions we are really asking here is, really? What or why or how do we actually confirm or being able to say that digital twins lead to better decision-making? Oftentimes, the actual options being presented do not necessarily lead to the better decisions being made, because of other problems that we are facing, probably not just limited to here in Australia, but across the world, which is populism, which is a polarization of decision-making and governments, as well as in the very institutions that make up our democracy. And so whilst we are working towards this much more robust evidence base, actually finding politicians that have the confidence and the backbone to then make decisions based on that evidence is still very difficult to find. Which brings me to this main focus of today's talk, which is the social license to operate. So as the smart city agendas and the associated technologies and the investment are being rolled out and deployed, what about you and me? What about people living there? What about communities, especially a diversity of communities, whether it is low income, whether it is those communities from different language and cultural backgrounds? The social license to operate is a notion that here in Australia, but I assume in other jurisdictions and countries as well, comes from other industries that actually had a much more explicit understanding of requiring to maintain an ethical existence. To have a social license meant that they required to work together with communities in order to offset, if you'd like, or find a balance between the damage that they are causing, either to the environment or to community amenity, and the economic development or the economic growth and benefit that they are working towards. So very big example is the mining industry. The mining industry in Australia is a very big operator. Oftentimes the figures and numbers used to suggest mining as a big operator are inflated. For instance, due to the introduction of machinery, automation and robotics, the number of jobs and the number of people employed by the mining sector has actually gone down over time quite significantly. Yet the peak bodies, the advocacy industry groups that are representing the mining sector continue to say that this is the biggest industry sector in Australia, when in fact it's the tourism and the education sectors that are arguably the two biggest ones by far, outpacing the mining sector. So we've been looking at some of these existing trials and tribulations, existing kind of friction in such industries. And we've said, well, this is really, really useful for us to think about what's happening in cities as well. One of the reasons is that there was more and more scholarly literature being published that were quite critical on the ramifications of smart city technology deployment and investments. This one is an example here of surveillance technology introduced in Darwin, which is in the Northern Territory here in Australia. And the mayor there of the city of Darwin is dismissing privacy fears of smart city conspiracy theorists, it was said here in the media. Yet there is more and more evidence. This is a slide I've borrowed from my colleague, Dr. Monique Mann, who it says there is a deacon, but she's actually moving to a new appointment in Wellington in New Zealand. And she's a privacy expert. We've been working together on articles and research that is looking at privacy and surveillance concerns in the smart city as on the basis of the technology that's been rolled out. So it always has a flip side when such technology gets introduced. The proponents argue that it's great to prevent shoplifting, to make sure that everyone is safe, to avoid violence when there's instances and scenarios of crowding, say at sports events. But it can also have negative ramifications. And what the smart city doesn't do very well right now is finding that balance. At the moment, a lot of what we see is driven by discussions between government, investors, and industry suppliers. And these kinds of more critical sides of the smart city agenda get not as much airtime in those closed door discussions. What has been useful, though, in recent times is the industry fora, the kinds of congresses, events, conferences that industry attend and organize, and I've been attending some of those. They are very slowly starting to approach some of these topics as well. And I think that is a useful sign that there is a much more explicit engagement with some of these critical factors. The question just remains, what are the takeaways? What will industry do as a result of some of these risks of backlash from the community? Now, in the research that we've conducted, we've been doing one big case study on the sidewalk labs development at the waterfront in Toronto. This was published in a special issue of the Journal of the Association for Information Science and Technology, or short for JASIST. What happened there is that the city of Toronto wanted to progress their own smart city plans together with a subsidiary of Google Alphabet that's called Sidewalk Labs. And this particular project created quite a bit of furore and media, partly because there was backlash from the community. So here in this Bloomberg article, critics vow to block Sidewalk Labs' controversial smart city in Toronto. What was interesting in the research we've conducted is that this backlash wasn't limited to ordinary citizens concerned about surveillance and privacy. The backlash and the opposition also extended to elected representatives, which was a bit of a new element. So we've heard from elected, I believe they're called councillors in the municipality, in the governance of the city, that were concerned about the way that the technology would jeopardize their ability to actually govern Toronto in a sovereign way, the way that the law and the legislation requires them. So imagine you have a dashboard, imagine you have digital twins, you have data in the cloud, and this technology is then used to say, this is what you got to do. You got to, build another tunnel, you got to recruit more police forces, et cetera, whatever the different findings might be. But the data that this decision-making is based on is not owned by the city. It's not owned by Toronto or by Canada. It's in the cloud. Access to it is based on proprietary technology. It might be that the actual data centers that give rise to this notion of cloud computing, they could be located anywhere. They could be in the US, they could be in other countries. And so you can see that compared to conventional decision-making in a municipality, the governance all of a sudden changes quite a bit. And so what we found interesting here is this element that there was protests on the street about the privacy and surveillance concerns, as well as other concerns relating to the community on the ground. But there was also a heightened awareness amongst the politicians that introducing this technology would have ramifications for the way the city itself is governed. So the big question was, are we still in charge, or is Google in charge? Some of the posters that were produced at the time, this is calling for a meetup or protest. And you can see there's an alliance of different community advocacy groups that are coming together. And it eventually led to the media amplifying these concerns. This was not just limited to social media, but the actual mainstream media started to cover this quite extensively, and it was a bit of a test for the way that smart cities are being introduced in this quite top-down and technology-led kind of fashion. This probably was a bit of a tipping point. This is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation reporting on the fact that Anne Cavoukian, the privacy commissioner, actually stepped down as a result of the concerns that she had, and she resigned over the data concerns when it came to the deployment of the Sidewalk Labs proposal in Toronto. We've, in our article, juxtaposed and compared some of the things that have happened there in Toronto. By the way, the project has more or less been cancelled, folded. They're not proceeding anymore. Whether that was with regards to financial considerations, so it's a direct result of the community opposition and backlash, is to be argued. But I think the community backlash definitely had a huge role to play in some of the decision making there. So we've juxtaposed this with Barcelona in Spain. And colleagues in our team also been working together and interviewed Francesca Bria, the Chief Technology Officer, who's been leading the charge in Barcelona when it comes to smart city deployment as well. But she's going about it very, very differently. And this quote is illustrative of this, where she says, "We are reversing the smart city paradigm. Instead of starting from technology and extracting all the data that we can, before thinking about how to use it, we started aligning the tech agenda with the agenda of the city." And without going into too much detail, what was really interesting is that they've also started to be quite innovative about developing platforms, portals, and technical solutions that allowed more and more people to participate in city data analytics. And so this is the article that goes into a bit more detail about it. And again, I'm happy to share the slides so you can access some of the links there. In another piece, I've tried to create a bit of a meta view on what's been happening overall. And I've been tracing this relationship between cities and people. And again, it's a very crude kind of table, but at this time, a lot of the kind of stakeholders in city governments as well as in industry, they like numbering. So this version numbering of city 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 was really useful because everyone wants to be on that higher level. And so I've been saying that the original kind of city relationship without that modern digital technology comes onto the scene is really that of administrator and residents. Here in Australia, oftentimes in this kind of very cheeky way, cities are referred to as the operators of the roads, rates, and rubbish. So it's the taxes being collected to then operate the waste management system and the road network. This has very much changed with the original introduction of the smart city, where I already alluded to the fact that industry have persuaded cities to think of themselves as service providers. And the people living there are then largely the consumers of those services. What we are hoping to contribute towards is elevating towards these levels of 3.0 and 4.0, where cities actually think of themselves much more as facilitators and people are participants. So this connects back with notions of the right to the city and the way cities are actually part and parcel of its of their citizenry. And at that higher level, it's much more a relationship on par, which is that of collaborators and co-creators. And the Barcelona example is probably trying to aspire to those kinds of values. There is, though, a downside in this because both industry and government has recognized that these participatory methods, both participation with regards to planning practice, but also with regards to community engagement, with regards to the inclusion of different voices, it can have this risk of being co-opted by city officials as well as industry to what we in this article call engagement theater. So they're actually playing engagement theater, which means that it's using these participatory kinds of methods in a very tokenistic manner without having a clear commitment to actually acting on the feedback, acting on the ideas, acting on the contributions that people have made as part of these engagement and consultation phases. And that can have detrimental effects because people eventually get very cynical and very fed up with being engaged, being consulted, having their say, contributing feedback, spinning their wheels, but then nothing really changes because decisions have already been made well ahead of time. Another part to the social license is how we need to also find a balance when it comes to sovereignty. Either the notions of data sovereignty is used very frequently or the notion of technological sovereignty. In this article, it talks about the sovereignty at that very national level when it comes to the ownership. And I alluded to this with regards to, for instance, those elected representatives in Toronto being concerned about where is the data located, who owns the data, is this a investment of technology that is provided by North American companies, by Chinese companies, by South Korean companies. And so there is then a clear clash between the nation states and the jurisdictions, the way nation states would be able to govern themselves, as well as the more global data network, analysis network, in the way that corporate jurisdictions and very confidential and private proprietary kinds of frameworks are governing the data. And so the clash between the corporate jurisdiction and the nation states jurisdiction is something that is increasingly being problematized, not just in academic circles, but also in policy circles. So I'll just finish off with showing you one example there of more design-led research that we've been doing in response to some of these more theoretical as well as review approaches to research. And this is the notion of participatory data analytics. We have been dabbling in that space of smart city design, urban computing, ubiquitous computing. This is a very early example in Melbourne at Federation Square, where we've been using technology platforms to enable people to have a say by sending text messages onto this big screen. This was around the victory of the Tour de France, and people that were en masse in this civic square were able to send messages via a mobile phone number. Very early days of mobile technology and screen technology. We've also been combining some of these community engagement technologies into this redeployable structure that we've called the Instabooth, that can be erected quite close to where, for instance, development is being proposed. And this can then be used to combine both analog as well as digital means of eliciting feedback, engaging in community dialogue, and finding more genuine manners of community engagement. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip this video and go to the actual main example I want to talk about, which is, again, informed by the notion I mentioned, Lefebvre's notion of the right to the city. But here we're talking about the right to the digital city. So how can some of these digital tools be used in order to enable new ways of advocacy, activism, placemaking? The other end of the spectrum, we were also inspired by an investment our university made in this very large screen that is over 2 stories. You can see it in the relationship to the size of the people there. And what is quite interesting, if you compare this photo with the photo I showed you earlier of the IBM Control Center, this one here is it's open, it's public. People can walk in there, they can actually collaborate on data analytics, and we were interested in finding the means and coming up with design ideas of how that kind of participation in data analytics can be facilitated. The case study we used is food trucks. I assume they are a popular kind of thing in the US as they are here in Australia. So these food truck operators are sole traders that prepare food in the afternoon, and then they go out into the city to sell their food. We set up a mini smart city laboratory at the place where these food trucks come together in the afternoon next to a commercial kitchen to prepare their food. And so what we've tried to do is to enable the data to come to ordinary people, in this case, these freelancers and sole traders that don't really have the financial means to hire big accounting firms or city data analytics teams to do the analysis for them. So we tried to make it really, really simple with this dashboard that allowed them to, for instance, optimize their placement. So you can see here different suburbs in Brisbane. And what usually had happened previously is that they would randomly go into the city, which can result, for instance, in internal competition. You might find Pasta Pizza Italian right across the corner, which is not great for business. So we tried to give them an ability to be more strategic about their placement, but we've also given them abilities to identify events and crowding. When does crowding occur in the city? And especially the kind of crowding that they hadn't really considered. Like, for instance, closer to home, the fact that postgrad students would be on campus studying after hours, and when classes finish, the only dinner options for them would be a vending machine or a microwave. And so having the data from the university about when classes finish in what lecture theaters and how many students are there that would finish at what time, and then positioning those food trucks at that right time would obviously create a small business opportunity for them. Similar with construction sites, music events, sports events, other kinds of crowding that occurs where this mobile deployment of food trucks is useful. So this led us to propose this notion of DataCare, which is an actual platform to try and renew the social license to operate smart cities. And it's structured into these 4 different configurations. One is around data awareness, to actually be able to convey to much more lay audiences what data is available at the city, what can it do, but also what are some of the ramifications and risks with regards to, for instance, terms and conditions, privacy, data ownership, sovereignty, and so forth. This is kind of the entry level to the DataCare facility. The second configuration of this space is for literacy training. So you can run workshops, you can actually combine both much more utility-driven workshops with awareness-raising workshops. And then the more interesting, I think, configurations are on data action and data future. So the food truck example is an example of the data action configuration, where the dashboards, the analysis facilities can be configured for specific groups of people, for instance, community groups, to create their own analysis scenarios. And then data futures is designed for the city government itself to use speculative design methods in order to understand what are some of the implications of us changing policy, changing regulations, us making new investments. What could go wrong, really, is what the data futures scenarios are looking at. We've described how data care works in a more detailed chapter that is available in this book. It's called From Automation to Autonomy, Technological Sovereignty for Better Data Care in Smart Cities. Now, throughout this, I've mostly been referring to urban examples, but there is a lot of work happening right now, and actually also a lot of very fast-paced deployments of the same, if not very similar, technology in rural remote communities. And so we've just started to work on some of the agricultural context. And in this piece that was published in Information Communication Society, we looked at some of the kind of more negative sides of the challenges and the risks that come from farmers and farming communities adopting digital agricultural technology. And the issues are not just limited to that of the digital divide, but also a much broader perspective on digital inclusion, which includes the ability to actually understand what are some of the ramifications. And you might have heard of John Deere, a big brand in the agtech sector, and the way that they've been using agricultural technology in the very similar fashion to how smart cities operate, because of the way that tractors, farming machinery have digital sensors, and this kind of agricultural technology is used to harvest data that is then not just owned by John Deere, but it's also used for further commercial benefits that John Deere would have. And the question becomes, what are, again, the ramifications around not just privacy, but in this case also other additional concerns, such as the right to repair. So we have heard, for instance, from farmers that have more recent John Deere equipment, that they are not able to repair anymore themselves if it breaks down. Because of the introduction of digital technology, first of all, John Deere would be notified if a farmer is, for instance, trying to attempt their own repair work. But also it means that some of the data that could be really, really beneficial for farmers, for instance, to optimize the way that they use fertilizer, the way that they go about their crops, is not accessible in that way unless farmers and other stakeholders might be willing to pay a subscription fee to these commercial services. Yet they are the ones that are actually producing this data that is then not available to them themselves. So I think there is quite a wide remit of discussion where insights from that smart city field in the metropolitan sense can also have really profound ramifications for the urban and the rural field. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcus.